Welcome back to Ethical Exits. We are now in 2025. This episode will come out in February, so we're recording this in the first couple weeks, first couple days of February. And yeah, we just wanted to get back on and take a little bit of time to review the original objectives of the podcast. Now that we've shot and recorded and released 6 different episodes, we wanted to kind of recap and score how we've done as far as the original objectives, and also just talk about them again as far as the point and purpose of Ethical Exits. And then I also thought it was kind of nice because as our community is growing organically over time, Caitlin, we're not putting any ad dollars into this podcast, not doing anything formally to promote it, as is the nature of a startup, right? But we're putting a lot of time and energy into it, and our community is growing organically. We wanted to provide an easy spot where folks who are maybe new to the podcast can get caught up on what's been talked about, the conversations we've been having, who's been on the podcast, learn a little bit about each one of them, and then self-select. Maybe there's a couple episodes or a couple conversations that they are most keenly interested in, and then they can just dive in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm super excited to dive into each clip. Each one of our guests had really insightful feedback for us when it comes to entrepreneurship and what it takes to exit their businesses ethically and that crazy up and down journey that they went through. But it seems like all 6 of them came out on the other side, whether it was selling their business or just, going through the trials and tribulations of building a company and, exiting it in a way that, values yourself and the employees that create the foundation for your success. So I'm really excited to look back because we had so many incredible guests on. I feel really fortunate that we were able to speak to so many inspiring individuals in just a short amount of time starting this podcast. So it's been pretty incredible so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so to recap on this greatest hits episode, let's go back to, and I pulled it from episode 0. I just looked at it again. Like, what were our initial objectives? Why are we here? Why did we start this podcast? And the goals that I kind of outlined and we talked about on episode 0 were fourfold. The first being that we believe there's tremendous opportunity for B Corps to partner together and to leverage this vehicle of M&A, of mergers and acquisitions, to expand and accelerate not only their growth, but achievement of their missions, right? Which is what separates a profit for purpose company from a purpose for profit company, right? From B Corps and triple bottom line companies, from your average everyday business, right? This is a way where you can use, we thought, right, and we still think, we're even more motivated in this direction, that M&A, although it has a bad reputation, one that's certainly earned, there have been a lot of bad outcomes from M&A when it's used in a vulture capitalism, suck all the value out, short-term goals perspective. But we believe just because that's the way it's been used doesn't mean that's the way it has to be used, right? And that members of the B Corp community have a tremendous opportunity to partner with each other. It's a very fragmented space. There are a lot of small, medium-sized companies, a lot of companies doing the same thing, right? A lot of creative companies, for instance, especially where I am in Portland, Oregon, there's a lot of marketing companies in the area that are registered B Corps, right? So are there ways where if they partner together to grow and scale, accelerate their missions? Also, this is a new concept that was introduced to me by Jim Black, a B Corp attorney I met with this morning, that this is a way where companies can create a bigger, better company for their employees than to take over, right? Through acquisition. So as an exit vehicle, but also as an acceleration vehicle for regenerative wealth transfer, to lift the tide for all boats for their employees, right? They're the ones that are really the backbone of the value. So that was like the first objective. Can we help B Corps understand, can we bring buyers and sellers together, right, in the community? Can we bring service providers who tangibly touch some part of the M&A process? Can we bring them on the podcast and talk about their experience, or even just, elevate their ideas, right? That was the first one. And I think that I would give ourselves an A on that. I think we've been able to do that fairly consistently. Everyone we've had on the podcast has been a mission-driven, triple bottom line business, a B Corp or otherwise, that has either bought or sold in the space, right? And has some experience with that. So I give us a pretty good score there. The second objective was to educate and demystify M&A, right? I mean, it has such a bad reputation, right? That especially people in a mission-driven space don't want to talk about it, and maybe don't know a lot about it, maybe don't want to know a lot about it. There's a lot of FUD. So we wanted to educate and demystify the space just by talking about it via our third goal, transparently, right? To bring people into a safe space where they could talk about either the acquisition they went through, maybe their buy process they went through, how they approached it, why they went through that path. Because at some point, with the silver tsunami and all these other things that people are talking about, there's a lot of intersections in people's lives as they created a business where selling it makes sense, right? Or buying another business makes sense, right? When you're talking about an asset sale or something like that. And then the fourth thing was to just create a community, right? It was a light bulb moment for me when I learned, and I talked about this in episode 0, that Bart Houlihan, the former president of And One and the co-founder of the B Corp movement, started the B Corp movement from out of a failed M&A transaction, And One, right? So that was certainly very meaningful for me in our journey as we kind of like coalesced on what we're trying to do with Up and Over and with our mission, help companies leverage M&A as a force for good. Can M&A be a force for good, right? That is effectively the exploration in the community that we're trying to generate, trying to start, trying to cultivate with this podcast. So I think we've done a pretty good job with that as well. And we see that in our organic growth numbers.
Absolutely, Hannah. And I think too, when you're, an entrepreneur, you're like a small to medium sized business owner, you have your mission, you have your values, but then, you get presented with an opportunity. And I think it's easy to justify little compromises when there's a financial upside. And I think to your point, we wanted to demystify the M&A space to make it more approachable and to empower, entrepreneurs and small to medium sized business owners to say like, hey, you know, if you're going to make these compromises, those small, misalignments really add up fast. And if a deal forces you to stretch your values too far, you'll end up resenting it later. So I think that the common trend or the common theme amongst all of our 6 guests was that they didn't let their core values, or I should say, they didn't let money come in the way of their core values. And in all 6 cases, that has only benefited them for the better. So it's just to show that you don't have to compromise and you don't have to go along with the rest, or you don't have to see the money sign to ensure that you're going to see the success that you've imagined all along.
Super empowering. Yeah, so let's get into the different clips. We have picked a couple clips from each episode and we'll talk about them, talk about kind of the highlights from them and what we thought our takeaways were, right? And what we thought was really interesting about those conversations. So our first episode was with Sarah. She's a co-founder of Impact Collective here in Portland. And I thought Sarah was a genius foundational guest. I mean, really, like if you're going to start a podcast about how do I think about M&A or how do I leverage M&A as a force for good, being someone who's really, really focused on impact and mission-driven growth, Sarah was so cool. I thought the main thing that she really provided to us with this podcast, with her interview, was that foundational piece of what it even means to be impact focused, right? How do you even start a company that has true value alignment? How do you start a company that is held accountable to those values, right? Like you said, every single one of our guests stayed true to what really mattered to them, even in this kind of pressure cooker environment where money starts to like lead large, right? How were folks really able to understand what they wanted to get out of the transaction and stick with it? The first clip that we pulled from Sarah that we thought was really good was this conversation around scorecards, right? And that's often what we think about with accreditation or certification processes like the B Corp certification. And there's others out there, of course. That's not the only one. Sarah and her team actually has another one that they're working on. How do you use scorecards to score yourself before you can even score potential suitors? So let's roll that one.
Sounds good.
I think one of the most important things, like before you external, kind of trying to like gauge or score like external partners, is that you have to have a deep and intimate understanding of your own set of values and how you are scoring yourself. So for the Impact Collective, we have an impact scorecard. We do the scorecard for clients and we have a scorecard for ourselves. That scorecard is based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It ties in B Corp, questions from the B impact assessment and goals that we've set there, so that we're really clear, about who we are as an organization and what it is that we're trying to do and what we care about.
So super clear there, right? I mean, Sarah's talking about the scorecards that they've created because they help clients, right? They're a consulting firm. They help clients become B Corps, right? Or recertify as a B Corp or a triple bottom line business. They help companies understand what impact they're trying to make and how to go after it, right? How to make that foregone conclusion, right? How to really pursue that.
Did you know that Unilever's sustainable living brands, obtained through strategic acquisitions, expanded 69% faster than the rest of their portfolio? This business strategy isn't just for giants like Unilever. You too can execute a similar model to drive growth and impact. At Up and Over, we specialize in helping mission-driven companies grow by acquiring like-minded businesses. Ready to build your own portfolio of impact? With Up and Over, it's within reach. Visit upandoveradvisors.com to learn more.
So Sarah's talking about okay, so we have scorecards. We created scorecards. They follow the UN Sustainable Goals. Start there. Know thyself, right? Which is very basic, but it's super true. It's if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what you really care about, how in the world would you protect it through after an acquisition?
I think that the scorecard system that her company implements, like I said before, you have to ensure that there's no misalignment because that will add up fast. And if a deal forces you to stretch your values too far, like I said, you'll end up resenting it later. So having a non-negotiables list, like Sarah states, it helps keep those boundaries very clear.
And then in this next clip that we pulled, I thought was really good from Sarah. She talks about okay, so we talked about scorecards, right? Like getting your metrics, understanding what you're going after, how you're going to score yourself. But that's not the objective, right? Don't get too wrapped up in the scorecard. Really focus on the impact. So she dives a little bit further on that. Let's watch that one.
A good clickbait blog title, and my favorite one was we're not passionate about B Corp. We did a blog. We're not passionate about B Corp certification. We're passionate about the framework for increasing your impact, right? So when we go through the B impact assessment with clients, our goal is not to find low-hanging fruit, easiest points, how do we game the system? Our goal is to create a roadmap that is based on your strategic priorities.
I thought that was super good. Sarah saying it's not about the score. It's not about, how you prepared. It's what you actually are doing, right? That should be the focus. And that's where they really help clients align. And then they help the clients actually achieve the impact they're seeking, not just achieving, getting an A on the exam for the B Corp certification. So I thought that was really helpful. And Sarah, she kind of set that foundation, right? It's okay, if your goal is to sell, right? Or if your goal is to acquire but maintaining your values, how you better know what they are, right? And you better know what you're actually striving for. I thought she was really strong on those points, really valuable episode, especially if you're thinking about becoming a B Corp or becoming a more purpose-driven company. That's a great episode to listen to. Sarah provides a lot of useful feedback and resources, just a matrix of how you would even approach that.
You're not just checking boxes or pursuing the low-hanging fruit, like she said. If anyone, I love certifications, but they're not the full picture. I think that real impact is in the choices a company makes on a daily basis, whether that be how you treat your employees, how transparent you are with your customers, etc. And I think companies like Patagonia or Allbirds do this really well because their impact isn't just a marketing tool. It's baked into how they really operate and really who they are at their essence. I think that shines through. And I think that customers see that, employees see that. They're not stupid if you have integrity behind what you do.
I think that's so spot on, Caitlin, and it's such a good way to vocalize that. I think when you look at companies, like one of my favorite B Corp companies, triple bottom line businesses, is Who Gives a Crap. I love that company. I think they're so badass. And they have really, really, started, or they've really adopted this new capitalism model where capitalism and being a profit driven company is not about just, putting money in your pockets, lining your pockets, but it's about scaling philanthropy. So I would be curious. I don't know if this has ever been done, but speaking to what you just said, it's about your actions, right? They're a B Corp. Obviously, they're certified B Corp. I'm sure they score pretty high on that standard on their scorecard. But I would also imagine, and then in the past few years, they've probably built as many toilets in third world countries as NGOs have, right? I would bet, right? Because they donate 50% of their profits. They are very much impact driven. They use their vehicle of selling toilet paper, selling a commodity, to act and make an impact in the world. And that is exactly what Sarah's talking about. So super cool. I think that's a great place to start for folks if they're curious. The second episode was with David Kahl, another local PDXer. I apologize. I am biased, obviously, towards my local community. But David was on kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum from where Sarah, started us, right? It's like, okay, this is how you'd start a B Corp. This is how you really think about a B Corp. This is how you protect your values moving forward. David had built a $50 million B Corp, a furniture company called Foley. And David's story, I thought, was really fascinating. I mean, he really stayed on task as far as our primary goal to talk to educate, demystify, and talk transparently about that process, about what it took to sell his business, how he went about it. The first clip that we picked out he talks about that I thought was really valuable is, and I had this conversation with this B Corp M&A attorney today. These transactions start a little bit differently. In a traditional M&A transaction, it's about show me the P&L. Where's the profit, right? What is your cash flow? And a mission-driven acquisition, that's not where David started. In his confidential informational memo, right, his SIM or his CBR, his confidential business review, which is what you typically receive as a first step, right, as a buyer. After you sign an NDA as a first step in an M&A transaction, you get some sort of memo, right, that talks about the business, their growth, their revenue, their spreadsheets, right, the financials. David didn't start there. He started somewhere else. He started with his values. So let's look at that.
I thought a lot about this because we led our deck out with our values. Like the first page of our deck, the first several pages of our deck weren't about, hey, these are our financials, these are our products, whatever. These are our values. These are our 5 values. And these are our North Star. And this is what motivates us. This is how we are as a company.
David made that really clear, right? Even as he was courting, due to the size of his business, Caitlin, there weren't a lot of people who could buy his business.
Yeah, small group of people. But I think too that what David showed in this clip was that the best partnerships are the ones that work long term, right? Not just financially, but how you're going to be working day to day. Because you and I have seen, in our careers, we've seen deals fall apart pretty much over values misalignment, and I would say every time it ended up being for the best, right? Because if a company doesn't get your core values from the start, like David said, it's really a sign of bigger problems down the line.
And in David's story too, that we don't have a clip on this, but I think it's a really important part of his story, and one that we heard echoed from a lot of the folks we interviewed. His journey was very personal, right? It's not like he didn't start a furniture business because it was his family thing, right? And he took it over, right? It was a personal journey that came out of the heartache and the kind of the personal crisis he was in after 9/11, right? And he really talks about that in a very authentic, very just a raw way, right? David has a way to connect with folks. I thought that was really cool. And then his success there with Foley was really impressive. How he built that company, how intentional he was about that company, how he sold that company. David first, there was 2 transactions that you'll learn about in that episode. The first transaction, he sold his business to another very similar furniture business called Knoll, and they understood what David was after. They were big enough where they could absorb fully, they could pay the price. to buy his company, but they also really understood what David wanted and what he was trying to achieve with Fully. And he shared that they actually, I think they donated to B Corp or to B Lab as part of the transaction. So that was really cool for David to experience. Unfortunately, with COVID and all sorts of different things, unforeseen situations, and certainly one thing that David learned too, that others have shared with us, and that you must be prepared for when you sell your business. When you sell your business, you have no longer have control. So Noel ended up selling the business to Herman Miller, and now Foley is no longer. So his story is complex in that way. His journey has been complex in that way. Really cool guy. It was great to have him on the pod. He talks about a little bit about his future endeavors too, which is really interesting for folks as he really fought to combat against loneliness being an entrepreneur. He talks a little bit about that as well and his vulnerability there. Really powerful.
Yeah, the emotional side of entrepreneurship. I feel like that was a big talking point for many of our guests and how taxing it is.
Oh my God, totally. I mean, he talks about that in a lot of different ways. That's a perfect transition for our third guest, Bonnie. If I could jump to Bonnie. Bonnie, she started an organic food delivery business before food delivery was even a thing, right? This is like 10 years ago. Plus, I think, her transaction and her journey. Bonnie Coberly. Bonnie, talk about authentically presenting her story. That is what resonated with me. What I remember most about Bonnie was how, even though this selling of her business, her story of, well, combating internal fraud, right? She had a staff that was stealing money from the business that she had to recover from in order to get to herself back up to profitability where she could sell the business. She was really burnt out. Food business is really hard. But Bonnie was just so authentic in her storytelling, and it was still, you could still tell that it was fairly raw for her. This was a dramatic experience for her, right? Even though she triumphed, she got everything she wanted from it. And she talks more about that, like the spiritual aspect of her journey. So again, these are conversations that we're having, I think, largely due to the nature of the space and largely to the nature of these entrepreneurs that we're communing with in this triple bottom line space. It's much more about than just the financials, right? Or about the bag that they got at the end of the day. It's really about like the hardship and the personal journey that these folks went through.
That is funny that you brought that up because I remember Bonnie being so open and vulnerable and transparent with us. And I think it made for such a better conversation because I think that listeners will be able to connect with her and understand the journey that she went through because she faced an identity crisis. Her identity was so tied to the business that she struggled with the question, who am I without this business? And I think that that's a topic that a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to.
Oh my God, so painful. That's a perfect clip. I wanted to show that one. Let's look at that.
Even in those early times of leaving Healthy Bites is just, realizing like kind of this identity crisis that I went through after I sold Healthy Bites, because I'd been known for 7 years as the CEO of Healthy Bites, and this is Bonnie, and this is what she does. And there was so much validation for who I was because of my enmeshed identity with this business. And so when you sell a company and you start to disconnect from that identity, at least for me, there was a huge process of like, who am I without this business? Like, what do I even care about? What do I actually want?
Super powerful.
Yeah, I think like Bonnie, like we said, I think a lot of founders, underestimate how much of their identity is tied to their business. I think that it's a good starting point. When you start to think what's next before your exit happens, whether that's like another venture or like an advisory role or even just, some time to reset, like having a plan to make the transition is going to make that experience way smoother for you. I know it's easier said than done, but I think similarly too, which we'll talk about later, something that Mackie touches on when she taught about exiting her business and how that preparation started years before to ensure that it could be as smooth as possible.
Oh God, she's a great example of that. Mm-hmm. And I think Bonnie is too. This next clip that I wanted to share, Bonnie had an amazing ability. I mean, just so resilient. All the things that she went through that she talked about on the podcast, that she just pushed her way through using the power of her clarity of intention, right? She really knew what she wanted to get out of it, right? What she wanted to happen with this transaction of her business, with the sale of her business. And she just got up every day and just made it freaking happen. No matter what that was, no matter what that meant, what she had to overcome, Bonnie just pushed through, and she did so in such a way that, I mean, I think she would say this, and I think she kind of does say this, that the universe did kind of reward her with kind of a perfect ethical exit, which is rare, right? So let's listen to that.
I had no idea when I started the process how it was going to end up. I just knew that I had the clarity of my intention was so strong.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important in anything you do in your life, but certainly in entrepreneurship is like just clarity of what it is that you want, and then being open to how it unfolds, because that's where actually the magic kind of happens, I mean, I could tell you just even the story, which I won't get into fully, but like just even how my kitchen like got acquired by someone. It was crazy.
So cool, right? I mean, Bonnie was really an inspiration, and really kind of dovetailing her story, follow kind of like what Sarah had talked about initially. Just get really clear on what your intentions are, understand what that is. David did that as well, right? By presenting his deck, regardless of the rooms full of brokers, right? That he was talking to. It's not about his financials, right? For the first few pages of that deck, it was all about his mission, about his values, what he cared about, what he was trying to create. And Bonnie too, right? So as far as our goal of providing community and sharing experiences of folks who've gone through this and how they did that, I think we nailed it through the first 3 episodes of this podcast series.
Yeah, and I think another thing that she was, saying too there was that, having a vision is crucial, but being too rigid can backfire on you, right? All right. And I think that Bonnie, what she, believes is that clarity in what you want combined with being open is where the magic really happens. And I think what she was also trying to convey to our listeners is that, adaptability isn't a backup plan. It's more of a success strategy. You have to be flexible, and you can't just, come up with this specific path, because there's always going to be bumps in the road. There's always going to be twists and turns. It's never really going to end up the way you envisioned it. But if you can kind of roll with the punches and just keep persevering, hopefully you'll end up on the other side.
Yeah, and establishing those boundaries, right? I mean, she definitely was clear on that, and she didn't have to violate any of those, right? For her experience with the exit, and then also for her entire staff. Like, that was really, really a cool story. Super psyched to share that with our audience. The next episode 4, was a little bit different. We went back to Portland. Went back to the entrepreneurial community in Portland, and we spoke with Cameron Medill, CEO, founder of Pixel Spoke. He was a friend of David. David recommended that we connect with him. And Cameron's story was a little bit different from those that we'd heard before, which really taps into this idea of creating a community and exploring innovative ideas and how you could go about M&A, use this vehicle in a different way. And Cameron, he introduced to us, certainly to me, I don't know how much exposure you had to this idea before, this concept or this modal before, Caitlin. I've never been a part of one in my working career. But what Cameron did as an exit strategy is he created a cooperative with his staff. So he effectively sold his company over multiple years, so an elongated transition, to his staff. And so that's where we started to learn a lot about EO, employee-owned structures. And I thought his episode was so wicked empowering, right? That there are more doors, there's more ways to pursue this, where you not only get what you need as a founder, founders have lots of reasons why they want to move on, but you get to retain and protect your legacy and give something back to your staff that's really meaningful.
From what we've learned in the past couple of weeks, and since we've spoken to Cameron too, inserting or implementing this type of employee-owned structure, I mean, you have better employee engagement, better employee retention, liquidity, all of these things. It just seems like just upside, upside, upside. And the more folks that we talk to, business owners or, folks looking to acquire other companies underneath their umbrella, this is a model that they're interested to learn more about, because it's not only going to benefit them, but also their employees and their brand. So that was incredibly interesting conversation that we had with Cameron. I really enjoyed.
Opened so many doors for me. And I think it's opened so many doors for how we're approaching even this year and the work that we hope to do. So a little teaser on that. We're going to be a lot more involved in helping companies leverage EO at the time of acquisition as well. employee ownership structures. But speaking to what you shared, Cameron does. He dives in pretty deep and all the different benefits of employee ownership, and they were super fascinating and super empowering. And he does talk about how that impacted his retention rates. So let's jump into that clip. And how do you feel, or do you have, I'm sure you guys have probably done analysis on this, but as far as retention, how has that impacted? I mean, how many people move forward and like dig it out, or how many people are just like, this isn't worth it, I'm going to go do something else?
Yeah, I actually, thank you for asking. I feel great about that. We always have had, I think, a pretty good culture and pretty good retention. I mean, always quite good. We had to measure this for B Corp, and you just kind of know it as a business owner, obviously. But it's almost a little eerie. I will knock on wood, knock, knock. We have not had a person leave since kind of spring 2021.
Very good. Yeah. So, I mean, employee retention, no doubt, right? Lights out. Cameron also talks about all the other associated benefits that you talked about, right? Resiliency, growth, all those positive benefits that you get from when you engage employees. And what's fascinating too is what we learned, and we have been learning, is there are three primary modals of employee ownership. There's the employee-owned cooperative, which is what Cameron chose, and that's designed more for folks on the lower end of the market. So between, what did Stacy say the other day, Caitlin? I think 1 to 10 million, maybe 1 to 5 million, right? 20 to 50 employees, something like that, is typically where employee cooperatives go, something in that range. And then you have employee-owned trusts as well, which is a different vehicle. And then you have ESOPs, which play at the top end of the market. And we'll be actually, teaser here, this is an announcement, we will be recording an episode with Stacy Smith from Project Equity this month. We'll be releasing it next month, and we'll be learning all about all these different structures, what makes one a good choice for a certain company, why you would choose another, as they're different. And with employee-owned cooperatives, one of the differentiators is it's opt-in, right? The employees have to opt in, and there's lots of different ways where you can get buy-in from your employees. So if I remember with Cameron, he talks about this in the episode, that in his cooperative, staff has to buy in, right? They have to be there for a little while and they have to buy in. And not only have they done that, right, in good numbers, he's got a lot of folks to really dig in, which is such a cool sign when you're running a business, that your staff is engaged, right? They want to be there, but they actually put down hard cash to be part of that cooperative, and then they stick around, right? So as far as from a legacy transfer perspective and preserving the value that Cameron built with Pixel Spoke, no better way.
I agree. And I think where a lot of businesses and companies get it wrong, and I'll just be transparent, it isn't about the perks of like a gym membership or Bagel Fridays or wearing jeans on a Monday. Nobody gives a crap about that. And I think what employee ownership does is it creates an environment where people feel valued and they feel supported and they feel motivated, because the companies that invest in leadership development, right, and mental health resources, and just, the opinions, they care about the opinions of their employees and they want their feedback, they see more long-term results than those throwing money at surface level benefits, if you want to call them. So I think that this has been a really interesting deep dive into employee ownership, and I'm excited to have Stacy on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's for next stage for us. Okay, so that was Cameron, right? Cameron's cool. Great episode. Really learned a lot about employee ownership that set us down a path. Maybe it will set you down a path if you listen to that. The next episode, episode 5, was with Mackie McNeil. And why don't you introduce her? Because you're the one who brought her to the pod.
Yeah, so I was first introduced to Mackie, the Atlanta B Corp convention a few months back in late 2024. And Mackie created the first, I think, was it CPA firm in Cincinnati, right? Okay. So she started a CPA firm in Cincinnati and was able to grow that CPA firm to one of the largest, not only in the city, but the state. She was also one of the first financial institutions to become a certified B Corp, which is really incredible. And throughout her journey, she had all these top tier clients bringing her a lot of money, but she had to take a step back and think to herself, do I want to be, supporting, I would say companies that only care about the bottom line? Like, it's more than just profit. I want to, reevaluate what I'm doing and restructure my company to ensure that, I am doing what I'm doing for a purpose or a higher good. And what she shared with us was a lot of insightful and really empowering feedback. And you'll see that in the clips that we're about to share.
Yeah, I think what you said, Caitlin, is really powerful and really embodies Mackie's spirit. I think Bonnie being a CPA, and I think this would be fair, right? If I think she would agree with this. And I think she kind of shared this with us on the episode. She kind of chafed at the idea of just being, and I'm using kind of a derogatory term here, but I've seen it on CPA websites, so they use it against themselves, being a bean counter, right? She really just didn't want to be at that point involved in helping businesses prosper, right? It's just from a financial bottom line. She really wanted to help people in a more comprehensive, holistic way. And she found that the folks that she was working with, right, in her portfolio, weren't really aligned with anything else she cared about, right? And I feel like that's a lot of people who are in impact entrepreneurship. That's the journey. And that was certainly our journey, right? We found that we had developed all these skills throughout our career, performing services, performing, in a profession, but doing it with people or for people that like really weren't in alignment with what we really cared about. So Mackie talks about her powerful story of effectively burning down what she built in order to rebuild something better. And when she was talking about the transition, so for her transitioning out, I think for the most part, Mackie these days, she's really more on a speaker circuit. She's a very inspirational speaker. A lot of people seek her out for her to tell her story. She's not involved in the day to day too much anymore. She's reached that point of privilege in her business. She's earned that. She's partaking, as she described it, in a generational transfer. So her objective is not to sell to outside. She has no interest in selling to private equity, right? Or even selling to a strategic. She wants to just to have the next generation take over her business. And that's been a long process for her. Similar to what Cameron shared with us, it was a more of a elongated exit through the employee ownership process. Mackie talked a lot about too how she's been planning and prepping for her own exit for a while. And that's the first clip I wanted to show.
And I looked at what was I doing? What did I need to do to be less involved in this business day to day? And I made a decision. And then after 5 years of working, every year I would refine my plans, set my quarterly objectives on how was I empowering the other people more in my business.
Excellent.
And taking myself out of the cornerstone. I took a 2-month sabbatical and I went away. I did not check email. I did not call in. I did not communicate with my team at all. And I came home to see what happened. And it was very informative. Everything went well, but they didn't develop any new business. So I thought, that's what they need to do. They need to work on their business development process.
I love this approach that she had. Like if your business can't function without you for at least like a couple of months, then that's a huge red flag, especially to any potential buyer. Obviously not in Mackie's case, but I think taking like an extended time away might be a good way to kind of stress test your operations. Another thing would be to delegate decision making ahead of time because you're still bottlenecking everything. Maybe your company really isn't ready for an exit.
Yeah, 100%. And Mackie, that advice is so pragmatic, right? Any entrepreneur can take that away and leverage that. And Cameron also spoke about that I thought was really cool. One of his comments from his episode that kind of touched on that. He said it hit, because when you transfer to an employee cooperative, it's not like everybody becomes a micromanager, right? Everyone's a manager and everyone just has 1-to-1 vote, right? But there's still all the organizational structure that's in place. That's really important, a distinction. So you don't lose control of your company because you're a cooperative. You don't just become like some, hippie commune, where you all are fighting over what to make for dinner. Like that's not what it is. But he did say, because there was shared ownership, right? And everyone was kind of bought in. Everyone had connection to how the business was performing, right, in a real way, and we're tied to that through the new structure. He said he never felt happier. Remember that, Caitlin? He said that those years that they had transitioned and he was still involved, those were the happiest years of him being a CEO because he was not alone anymore, right? He wasn't pulling the sled by himself, right? He had all those people on board and were, had his back, right? And wanted the same things that he did and would actively participate in those discussions, right? I think that's really in alignment with what Mackie did and what she continues to do in her business as well, which is super cool. And this is what happens ultimately when you care about your staff. You're not just using your business as a vehicle for self-enrichment, right? I think that's a big distinction and what we've learned and what we've heard from all of our guests. But Mackie, I think it's worth to share a few more clips from Mackie's episode. Her approach, not dissimilar from David or from Cameron's, but I would say that her and Bonnie, I really think have a lot in common on how they view their place in the world and in the universe. And Mackie had some really interesting insights into that as well that I thought is worth kind of sharing again with our audience. And I wanted to start with a clip where she talks about making it, but like not waiting for others to make the changes in your life that you need to. And a big part of Mackie's story, as you highlighted, she let go, she fired some of her biggest clients, right? And she sold off another third of her business so she could rebuild it into what she really wanted, right?
Mhm.
So I wanted to play this clip once more where she kind of talks about that.
I would say something very close to what you said, Hannah. We are the ones we've been waiting for. There isn't anybody else to wait for. We are the ones. So we have to look in our hearts. What are we here to do? What is my sole purpose? Why am I here on this earth at this time? Do I believe I can, and I believe that I can make a profound difference while I'm here.
Bang, right? It was just so empowering, the way she thinks about her ability to impact the world and also her responsibility to make it happen.
I loved that line she shared. We are the ones we've been waiting for. If your why isn't clear, is what I'm hearing her say, neither will your strategy. So, purpose alone won't pay the bills, but you need a solid plan that translates that mission into action. And it's going to start with you, not with anyone else.
Yep, absolutely. And this last clip I wanted to play from Mackie is this idea, this conviction that she has about just moving into this energy, right? Really leaning in to what you want, to your intention, and that the universe will take care of you. So very similar again to I think some of the lessons and the manifestations that we learned from Bonnie's episode. Let me play that for us real quick.
And I would say,
Yeah.
My fundamental belief is the universe is always conspiring for my highest good, no matter what the external events tell me. So I look at it this way. It's my job to go inside of myself and say, okay, the universe is always conspiring for my highest good. This isn't an outcome I wanted, but how do I accept it? And then what is mine to do? What is mine to do?
If you're not inspired by that, I have to say you're dead inside, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, wake up, man, because you're fucking asleep, right? I think that's so powerful and something that we can all leverage, right? I mean, this isn't just about selling your business, buying a business, what have you, owning a business, running a business. But I think that approach and that framework is everything, right? I mean, it certainly helps to keep her going and keep her motivated and to keep her eyes, on what she's really going for with that trust and resilience. Like Mackie for me is a real embodiment of bravery.
Also, I mean, being in an industry too, where it's so male dominated. So when you're, a woman having to make those decisions of restructuring an entire business that was viewed as this huge success story, think about like all of the obstacles in your way. And to hear how she was staying so positive when things ultimately were kind of falling apart and people were doubting her and not supporting her, you know, she used her mindset and it played a huge role in how she handled things. So instead of seeing those obstacles as failures, she saw them as redirections, is what she's saying. And, she used them as almost opportunities to adjust and to find a way forward, which I just thought was so inspiring. This is one of my favorite highlights, I must say.
Super, super inspiring. Such a cool story. And again, another great one, tangible, pragmatic guidelines that Becky provided for our community. Thought that was super cool. The most recent episode that we launched 2025 with is with, I don't know, he may be one of the more impactful people I have met like in the last 6 months through this process, which has really been a gift for me. And I think it has been for you too, Caitlin. Just being in this space, having these conversations with mission driven entrepreneurs, people who really give a shit, who are trying to solve problems or are doing more than just caring about themselves. They're not self-interested. They're really extroverted in their cares and their wants for the betterment of all of us. I've met so many inspiring people, but Josh Nauer was our guest on our last episode. And Josh is just a special human. He's one of those guys where I'm like, every single time I talk to him, every single time I have an opportunity to interact with him, he kind of stops me in my tracks, like with his insights and his clarity. He's just that kind of guy. And his POV has always been not only provocative, but just like kind of jarring in the sense of like, that's powerful. I never had thought about it that way. And when I shift my aperture in line with his, the opportunities that I see are much more numerous, right? So if I believe, and I do believe, as Mackie does, that the universe is always conspiring for my greatest good, Josh was meant to be in my life. And I'm so happy that he is, even in, this kind of remote video conference way, that he's in my life. I think he's been a really cool guy to get to know. And on his episode, I really wanted him to kick off 2025 with us because when I first met Josh, we were pre-election, right? And then when we talked with him, we were post-election. It was right before Trump was inaugurated, and it's been a challenging time for all of us, all of us across the political spectrum, here domestically, internationally. I mean, these things make a difference, right? These decisions, these elections make a difference in people's lives. And I really wanted Josh, because he's kind of he's an optimist, I would say, but not like a delusional one. But I think it's just his mindset, very much like Mackie's, kind of guides him north, right? He knows how to find light. And I really wanted him to share kind of his POV on what this means. Like, where are we? What is this? How is this going to impact a triple bottom line entrepreneurship? How is it going to impact the B Corp community? How is it going to impact profit for purpose companies? I just wanted him to share a little bit more about his thinking, because I think that he can re-inspire us, right? To think differently or a little bit outside of the box. I think that for all of us who are in this space of impact entrepreneurship, who are trying to do something, make an impact in the world, B Corps, this is the conversation we're having right now. What does this mean?
Yep.
And how do we move forward? How do we not just like, stay in bed all day?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Listening to Enya, I mean, how do we get up and get going? And how do we, really leverage this moment for acceleration?
Mm-hmm. So I think it just goes back to an underlying belief that I have, that nature and natural systems are as close to perfect as we know, right? And they're perfect in their imperfections as well. But one of the most basic ecological functions that exist in the world, right, is waste equals food.
Such an inspiring idea, right? Like, look at, and again, the way his mind works, right? That he looks at capitalism as a natural system, or as a system maybe that isn't out to get us, but can be used for our collective good, and that he looks at the ecological systems that mirror that. So in this Trump era, right, where I think certainly from my perspective, a lot of terrible things are happening every single day, but and I can consider that, I could define that, I guess, as waste. Right? Waste, and there's a lot of different ways. Can we use that as food, right? Does that help to push the pendulum back, right? In an enduring and powerful way? I think that's an interesting concept for us to consider, and one that might help us feel a little bit better about where we are right now.
Josh has a great way of expressing how like you said, listening to other people's opinions and ideologies and understanding that everything has a purpose, like the cycle of life and like nature. If companies thought this way, they'd be more efficient and adaptable. So I think that we just have to understand that, majority of people are good at heart and they want the best for one another. I think we just live in a time right now where it's, really jarring and it's scary for a lot of folks. But, his optimism and looking at the current climate that we're in right now with the glass half full is inspiring. And I think it was a great way to end the year.
In this same episode, Josh and I talked a lot. We talked a lot about using M&A as a force for good, right? Mm-hmm. Like Josh really does see a lot of value there with the work he's doing and how we can move capital together. And another idea that he had that I thought I've been thinking a lot about. Oh my God, I would love to find a way to participate in this in some way or another. Is this concept of what he defined as a people's fund, right? So we have a clip on that.
And we also need to understand, this gets to the people's fund concept, which is if we look at the accumulated wealth of all of the people who are shareholders in or own B Corps, right? That is a massive amount of capital that you could be working from. If we pooled that capital together of like-minded people together into a fund, right, that was values driven and figured out in the right ways. I'm waving my hands at that, of course.
Yeah.
But imagine the buying power and the investing power and the ability. And instead, what do? We actually go to lots of little investment firms and the socially responsible investing space is totally fractured out into tiny little companies, even if, at the scale of Calvert, which is, I think, I'm not endorsing one over another, but like that's a big company in our space. It's still tiny compared to Morgan Stanley or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
And we're just not creative enough in hacking an existing system. And you said it earlier in the conversation, we're afraid of our own power. We're afraid of actually succeeding in a marketplace. But if we're succeeding in a way that I'm talking about, where everybody is winning along the way.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we want?
This idea that we could, as a society, right, as an organization, as a community of like-minded folks, could crowdsource and crowdfund acquisitions, right? We kind of talked about this idea of M&A being not only a way where companies can buy other like-minded companies, or they can buy companies within verticals and expand their impact and create something better for their employees when they eventually retire, or they move on. They have a bigger, better entity, right, to pass on. It's no profit, no margin, no impact, no margin. They get that they can really, by growing the financial health of the business, right, their market share, they've created something better, and to do that in a way that impacts everybody. Right. Certainly that is the vehicle of M&A being a force for good. But how can we come together to fund these acquisitions, right? Or to design these acquisitions from the inside out, I think is also a really fascinating idea. And of course there's lots of examples I could point to, but I think M&A in a lot of ways has been used against us in some respects, used by these short-term thinking private equity players, right? For-profit players. And what if we took that power back and crowdsourced and created a people's fund where we had similar access to assets, but we could buy entities that maybe we wanted to disrupt, right? With our own long-term goals. So the example being, what if a large, cool clothing company bought a really large, terribly polluting clothing company, like a Patagonia buying a Shein or something, right? And if we could crowdsource that and make those kind of acquisitions happen, would be kind of a revolutionary idea. I know there's examples of this within like the stock market, right? Like you can buy into different funds that are actively buying shares of like oil companies so that they can gain seats on the board, and then they're disrupting the board, right? They're forcing change at the board level because they have enough ownership in the company, right? That they're crowdsourcing these kind of things. So really fascinating ideas from Josh that I thought was just kind of a cool way, Caitlin, to get us kickstarted into 2025. So I think that's a valuable episode, a really cool guy to listen to that just kind of rounds out, okay, what's the space of M&A? How do we go about it? How do we think about it? How do we execute on it? Okay, now looking forward, how do we use these vehicles for growth? And like really kind of challenging times, right? Like how do we accelerate emissions, do more, achieve more of what we're setting out to do? Which I think is really fascinating. Did you want to talk a little bit about our next episode to close?
Sure. So on our next episode, we have invited Stacy Smith. She is a senior VP, head of programs at a organization called Project Equity. Project Equity helps businesses transition through every step of the process when it comes to employee ownership. They're an incredible group of people that Hannah and I had the pleasure of meeting with several times, and they'll talk through, what employee ownership is, what structure would be the best for your business, and then what does that acquisition process look like. And they'll hold your hand every single step of the way, and then even post acquisition and post close to ensure that the longevity of your business and this new structure, is set in place and that your employees are happy. So I'm really excited to have Stacy on and, have her share insights into what EO looks like.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think it's most people think about these structures at the time of exit, but thinking about it as at the time of acquisition, or as a way to accelerate and to smoothen out the process of an acquisition is really inspiring. So I'm super excited about that as the next step for us.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there listening who think, okay, employee ownership sounds like a great idea until it's put into, it comes to fruition and you think, okay, I need to raise capital. Where am I going to get the funding to make such a substantial change in my organization? But their company also offers financial solutions to ensure that, these transitions are as smooth as possible. So I'm sure she'll go into that as well.
Yeah. Super cool. So I think, looking forward into 2025, as Josh likes to say, nothing is binary. We still have work to do. The universe is still conspiring for our greatest good. And we hope to share some ideas that shake some trees and help some people think through potential acquisitions or exits of their own and share more stories and resources in the space.
This was a fantastic look back at all of our highlights. And I would say the major theme that's stuck out, or a few themes that have, stuck out to me during this review, is that, success isn't just about making the right deal. It's about making the right decisions for yourself and your values and your team around you. And I think every guest that we've had on this year really reinforced that in their own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, until next time.
Until next time, folks. We'll see you later.
Ciao.